I never thought I would say this out loud. Never imagined I would be the kind of person with a secret so heavy, it could crush me. But here I am. And if you're watching this, you're about to hear the truth. I have been faithful to my husband in every way that matters. I have never searched for someone else. Never let another man tempt me. But my betrayal is different. My sin is not one you hear about every day. My story began when I was 19. And the person I betrayed my husband with was my father. Before we begin, I want to warn you, this story contains mature themes. It deals with the weight of grief, forbidden love, and choices that can never be undone. If these topics make you uncomfortable, you may want to stop now. But if you stay, I promise you one thing, you will hear the truth, exactly as it happened. No excuses. No justifications. Just the raw, unfiltered reality of what I did. And why, even after all these years, I still can't stop. I was never the kind of woman who took risks. I liked certainty. Stability. I was the girl who planned everything down to the smallest detail. My name is Liliana Cobb. I'm 32 years old. On the surface, my life is perfect. I have a husband who adores me, a beautiful home, and a love story that most people dream of. But perfection is a lie. Beneath it all, I carry a secret so heavy, it feels like it might suffocate me. I met my husband, Raphael Cobb, when I was 16. High school sweethearts. The kind of love that felt easy, natural, like breathing. He was patient, kind, the type of man who never raised his voice, never gave me a reason to doubt him. He loved me completely, and I loved him back. Enough to marry him at 18 without a second thought. We built a life together, just the two of us. We never wanted children, and that was fine with me. But there's something about knowing you can't have them that makes it different. When the doctor told me I was infertile, I felt something inside me crack. Not because I wanted a baby, but because it made me feel broken. Like I wasn't enough. I never told Raphael how much it affected me. I just smiled and said it was okay. Because that's what I do. I bury things. I push them so deep that even I forget they're there. But there was one thing I couldn't bury. My father. Soren Suarez. A man who used to be strong. Steady. The kind of father who never missed a school play, who taught me how to ride a bike, who called me his little girl even after I grew up. But when my mother, Nancy Suarez, got sick, something in him changed. He didn't cry in front of us. He didn't break down. He just disappeared. She fought for years. I remember the sound of the machines in the hospital, the way the house smelled like antiseptic and sadness. I remember holding her hand while she slept, listening to my father whisper to her like she could still hear him. You have to stay. I don't know how to do this without you. But she didn't stay. She died right before my wedding. I wore a white dress and walked down the aisle with my father at my side, but all I could think about was the empty chair where she should have been. After that, my father shut himself off from the world. He stopped going to work, stopped leaving the house. He sat in his chair for hours, staring at nothing. Grief swallowed him whole. That's when I started visiting him more. At first, it was out of obligation. Then, out of concern. And then, something else. I didn't realize how much I missed him until I started spending time with him again. I thought I was helping him heal, but the truth is, I needed him just as much as he needed me. Then there's Sky Suarez, my older brother. The one who always kept his distance. Sky was never the emotional type. He loved us, I knew that, but he wasn't like me. He didn't sit by my mother's bedside every night. He didn't talk about his feelings. And after she died, he grieved in his own way, by staying away. He'd visit our father now and then, but not like I did. Not like I did. At the time, I thought I was just being a good daughter. That spending time with my father was the right thing to do. I didn't see what was happening. I didn't see what we were becoming. And Raphael? My sweet, loyal husband? He never questioned it. Never asked why I spent so much time at my father's house, why I would come home quiet and distant, my mind somewhere else. He trusted me. And I broke him without him even knowing it. Because love isn't always enough. And sometimes, the people we love the most are the ones we destroy. I never planned for it to happen. At first, I told myself I was doing what any daughter would do. My father was grieving. He had lost the love of his life, the woman he had spent decades with. I couldn't stand the thought of him sitting alone in that big, empty house, drowning in his own sorrow. So I made it my responsibility to fill the silence. I started going over every day. At first, it was just for a few hours, making sure he ate, keeping him company. But those hours turned into whole afternoons, and then, entire nights. Raphael never questioned it. If anything, he encouraged it. He knew how much I loved my mother, how much I worried about my father. But it wasn't just grief that kept pulling me back to that house. It was something else. Something I didn't want to name. My father and I talked in a way we never had before. It started with stories about my mother, memories he had never shared. He told me about the first time he saw her, how nervous he was to ask her out. He laughed, and for the first time in months, I saw a glimpse of the man he used to be. Then, the conversations changed. He started opening up about things I never expected. About how lonely he was. How he felt like half a person without her. How some nights, he would roll over in bed, still expecting to feel her warmth beside him. I should have felt uncomfortable. I should have kept a distance. But I didn't. Instead, I listened. I comforted him. I told him that he wasn't alone. And that's how it started. Little things. Things that shouldn't have mattered, but did. A hug that lingered too long. His fingers brushing against mine when I handed him a cup of coffee. The way his eyes would lock onto mine, like he was searching for something I didn't understand yet. I felt something changed inside me. I told myself it was just sympathy. That I only wanted to take care of him, to make sure he didn't drown in his grief. But that was a lie. A lie I clung to because the truth was too dangerous to admit. Because the truth was, I started looking forward to being alone with him. I started noticing things I shouldn't have. The way his hands were still strong, even after all these years. The way his voice was softer when he spoke to me. The way he would look at me, not as a father looks at his daughter, but as a man looks at a woman. And I didn't stop him. I should have. I should have pulled away when his hand rested on my knee during one of our late-night talks. I should have stepped back when he tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering just a second too long. But I didn't. Because by then, I was already in too deep. One night, as we sat on the couch, the room quiet except for the faint hum of the television, he sighed. A heavy, tired sound. I haven't touched anyone in 3 years, he said. I knew what he meant. I knew where the conversation was headed. I should have stopped it. But instead, I turned to him and said the words that would change everything. You can have me if you need to. The first time, I felt nothing. No passion. No excitement. No guilt. It was quiet. Almost mechanical. A desperate attempt to fill the emptiness between us. We didn't speak after I said those words. I waited for him to react, to push me away, to remind me that I was his daughter. But he didn't. He just sat there, staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Then, he whispered, "Are you sure?" I nodded. Not because I wanted it. Not because I had been fantasizing about it. But because I wanted to fix him. I told myself this wasn't betrayal. I wasn't being unfaithful. I wasn't breaking my vows. This was something else. Something I couldn't name. We went upstairs to his bedroom, the same bed he used to share with my mother. He lay down, hesitant, unsure. It was over in minutes. No tenderness, no exploration. His hands barely touched me. His eyes stayed open, fixed on my face, searching for something I wasn't sure I could give him. When he finished, I got up, cleaned myself off, and left. I should have felt sick. I should have hated myself. But I didn't. Instead, I felt relieved. Because for the first time in years, he looked alive. For the first time, his grief loosened its grip on him, even if only for a little while. I told myself it was just one time. That it didn't mean anything. That it was no different than holding his hand while he cried or sitting with him in the dark when he couldn't sleep. That night, I went home to Raphael. I kissed him. Told him I loved him. Let him hold me in his sleep. And in the morning, I went back to my father's house. It happened again. And again. It became a habit. A secret that belonged to only us. At first, it was cold, distant. But then, the lines blurred. He started kissing me, not just during, but before, after. His hands became familiar with my body in ways they never should have. Then, the real betrayal began. I stopped going home at night. I would tell Raphael I was staying with my father, making sure he was okay. And it wasn't a lie, I was staying with him. I was in his bed, wrapped in his arms, letting him touch me the way a husband touches his wife. By then, I didn't question it anymore. I stopped thinking about right and wrong. I stopped thinking about anything at all. Until the night Sky found out. It was late. I had just finished taking a shower. My father was still in bed, under the sheets bare, his scent clinging to my skin. I wrapped a towel around myself and walked out of the bathroom, only to stop cold. Sky was standing in the doorway. I froze. He looked at me. Then at the bed. Then back at me. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Because there was nothing I could say. My hair was still wet. My clothes were nowhere in sight. The sheets were rumpled, and my father. The truth was laid out in front of him, undeniable, unmistakable. His face didn't change. He didn't yell. Didn't ask me to explain. He just turned and walked away. And that's when the panic set in. Would he tell? Would he destroy my life? Would he ruin the fragile world I had built? I stood there, heart pounding, towel slipping from my shoulders, as I realized everything was about to change. Sky didn't say a word. Not that night. Not the next day. Not ever. At first, I thought he would tell. That he would go straight to Raphael or confront our father in a rage. That he would do what any sane person would do, expose me, force me to stop, rip my secret from the shadows and drag it into the light. But he didn't. Instead, he carried it with him, silent and heavy. And that silence was worse than anything he could have said. At first, I tried to act like nothing had changed. I went home to my husband, smiled when he kissed me, pretended my world hadn't just been cracked open. I went back to my father's house, let him pull me into his arms, let him love me the way he wasn't supposed to. But Sky was always there. Watching. He started calling more often. Stopping by unexpectedly. Hovering in doorways, studying me like he was trying to understand something I couldn't see. His questions started small. You still go over there a lot? Does Raphael ever come with you? Dad seems different lately. Happier. I answered the way I always did. Short, simple, with just enough truth to keep the lies hidden. But then, his questions changed. Are you and Dad close? Closer than before? What do you two even do all day? It wasn't what he asked. It was how he asked it. His voice was too careful. His eyes too knowing. He never accused me outright, never forced me to admit anything, but the way he spoke, it felt like he was testing me. Like he was waiting to see how far I would go before I broke. I told myself he was disgusted. That he was sickened by what he had walked in on. That he was struggling to make sense of it, just like I had in the beginning. But I was wrong. One night, he came over while I was at my father's house. It was late, too late for a casual visit, but he didn't knock. He let himself in like he used to when we were kids. My father had already gone to bed. I was still awake, curled up on the couch in one of his shirts, the fabric soft and worn against my skin. I wasn't expecting company. Sky sat across from me, his expression unreadable. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then, quietly, he asked, "How long?" I swallowed hard. "How long what?" His jaw tightened. "How long have you been sleeping with him?" I could have lied. Should have. But I didn't. I held his stare. Since I was 19. His breath left him in a sharp exhale. He looked away, shaking his head. Jesus Christ, Liliana. I waited for him to tell me I was disgusting. That I was sick. That he couldn't look at me anymore. But he didn't. Instead, he asked me something else. "What's it like?" I felt my stomach drop. "What?" His voice was quiet, careful. "Being with him." "What's it like?" I should have told him to stop. I should have told him to leave. But I didn't. Because there was something in his voice. Something that made my pulse quicken. Curiosity. He wanted to know. And I wanted to tell him. I answered every question. Every single one. Yes, we kissed. Yes, we slept in the same bed. Yes, I let him touch me however he wanted. Yes, I enjoyed it. Yes. 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 And as I spoke, I watched my brother change. His breathing grew unsteady. His fingers twitched against his knee. His eyes darkened, locked onto mine, unblinking. I knew what was happening. And I should have stopped. But I was already spiraling. I leaned in, my voice barely above a whisper. "Do you want to know what else I do with him?" Sky swallowed hard. I reached for him. And just like that, I crossed another line. The moment our lips met, I knew I was lost. I had spent so long convincing myself that I wasn't a cheater. That I wasn't betraying my husband because what I had with my father wasn't about love, it was about comfort, about healing. But this? This was something else entirely. I wasn't just a daughter. I wasn't just a wife. I was something else now. Something I couldn't come back from. I became two different people. By day, I was the devoted wife. I kissed Raphael in the mornings, made him coffee, listened to him talk about work. I laughed at his jokes. I held his hand when we walked down the street. To him, I was the same woman he had always known, the woman he had loved since we were teenagers. But at night, when I was alone, I was someone else entirely. I had built a life on contradictions. I told myself I was a good person, even as I carried a secret that could destroy everything. I told myself I loved my husband, even as I kept pieces of myself hidden from him. I told myself I was in control. But I wasn't. Because the truth was, I didn't know who I was anymore. It wasn't just what I had done with my father. It wasn't just Sky finding out. It was the way everything had spiraled, the way I had let myself become something unrecognizable. At first, I thought Sky's silence meant acceptance. That he had chosen to bury the truth, just like I had. But I was wrong. Something in him had changed. He looked at me differently now. At first, his questions hadn't stopped. He kept bringing it up, probing, searching for something in my answers. But then, one day, he just stopped asking. Stopped looking at me the same way. Stopped speaking to me the same way. And I knew. He couldn't do it anymore. He started pulling away, avoiding me. Our conversations grew shorter, the air between us heavier. He wouldn't meet my eyes, and when he did, there was something new there, something that hadn't been there before. Disgust. Pity. I had thought I could handle anything. The secrecy. The weight of it. But this was unbearable. And then, the final shift happened. My father moved on. At first, it was subtle. He started leaving the house more often, started talking about a woman he had met through a friend. I didn't think much of it. I told myself it didn't matter. That it was good for him. That this was what I had wanted for him all along, for him to feel whole again. But when he told me he was seeing someone, that it was serious, something inside me cracked. I felt abandoned. I had given him everything. Every part of me. And now, he was ready to move on, to build a new life, while I was left standing in the wreckage of the choices I had made. I had sacrificed my sanity for him. And he was walking away. I wanted to tell him that he couldn't. That he wasn't allowed to just forget, to pretend like it hadn't happened, to erase me from his life so easily. But I couldn't say those things. Because what kind of person would that make me? I still had Raphael. Still had a husband who loved me, who trusted me without question. But as I lay next to him at night, listening to the sound of his breathing, I felt something that terrified me. I felt empty. I had spent years convincing myself that I wasn't betraying him. That I was still a good wife. But how could I love him when I had spent so long keeping secrets from him? And worst of all, what if he found out? What if Sky broke his silence? What if it all came crashing down? I had built my life on a lie. And I knew, deep down, that lies never stayed buried forever. The house is silent. Raphael is asleep in the next room, his breathing steady, peaceful. He has no idea. No clue that the woman lying beside him every night is nothing more than a mirage. I sit alone in the dim glow of the living room, the weight of everything pressing down on me. In my hand, I hold my wedding ring, turning it over between my fingers. A simple band of gold. A promise. A commitment. A lie. I never meant to be this person. I never thought I was capable of this kind of betrayal. But maybe that's the scariest part, how easily we become something we swore we'd never be. How one decision turns into another, how one lie becomes two, how before you know it, you're in too deep to crawl back out. I had convinced myself that I was in control. That as long as no one knew, it wasn't real. That as long as I kept the pieces separate, my marriage, my father, my brother, everything would stay intact. But the thing about secrets? They don't stay buried forever. They have a way of creeping to the surface, of rotting everything from the inside out. And now, I wait. I wait for the moment it all crumbles. For Sky to finally break his silence. For my father to slip up. For Raphael to look at me one day and realize that the woman he loves, the woman he trusts, is nothing more than a stranger wearing his wife's face. Some betrayals break hearts. Some break families. And some break the soul. I don't know which one mine will be. I don't know how this ends. But I do know one thing. No matter how much I try to run from it, no matter how much I tell myself I can hold this secret together, one day, it will destroy me. And maybe that's exactly what I deserve. Now, I want to hear from you. If you had everything to lose, would you still chase the one thing you weren't supposed to have? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story made you think, if it made you feel something, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.